Good morning, everyone, and welcome back in as we continue in this series, A Personal Experience with God. And last Sunday, I opened up by talking about God being in control, and I know that there's a lot of evidence that feels contrary to that. I mean, I understand the tension, and quite frankly, I feel it myself at times. And so it kind of goes like this: God, if you really care, would you just put COVID-19 behind us? And while you're at it, go ahead and deal with cancer and loneliness too. I mean, the question that we're trying to answer here as we're studying this Old Testament book of Job is, if God is in control and He cares, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? How do we explain the little and the big things in life that don't go the way that they should? There is a religious belief called deism that tries to explain it theologically, and it kind of goes like this: that God kind of got everything started, and now He just watches things unfold, that He's sitting up in heaven, sipping on a drink, and He watches us like we would watch a series on Netflix. We're here for His entertainment, but He doesn't really actually intervene in our story. So we're in this series, and again, in the book of Job, and Job believes in God, and Job wants to believe that God is in control, and he wants to believe that God cares, but he looks around him, and the evidence indicts God as being maybe out of control, and He doesn't care. So by Job chapter 2, he has lost his livestock, his servants, and his kids. And then we also read that God gives Satan permission to turn his attention to Job's health. And we learn in this section that Job is covered from head to toe in these painful boils. Job chapter 2, verse 8 describes it this way: Then Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped himself with it as he sat among the ashes. Just imagine that scene there. And his wife said to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." I mean, it's time to throw in the towel. She has seen enough pain, suffering, and disappointment, and she is ready to walk away from God. She's saying, "Job, God doesn't care about you. Why do you care about Him?" And so here's a good question for us today. Is God tender? Is God kind? Does God really care? One of the common descriptions of God in the Bible is Father. And so the question is, what kind of a Father is God? I can remember as a kid, at night, if something frightened me, I would go and wake up my dad. I'd go to the right side of the bed. That's where my dad slept. He was the protector. But if I had an upset stomach, I wouldn't go to the dad's side of the bed. I'd go to my mom's side of the bed. And you kind of see Job doing this. Job is going to the other side of the bed and he's asking God, "I know that you're strong and you can protect, but do you care? Are you tender? God, are you thoughtful? God, do you see me?" So in Job chapters 38, 39, and 40, God is asking Job a series of questions, and he starts with these grand questions that we talked about last week about the universe. Job, were you there when I set the foundations of the earth? Job, did you move the constellations in the sky? I mean, was that you out there doing that? These questions go from universe to biology, that God moves from astronomy to biology. And so in Job chapter 38 and verse 41, who provides food for the raven when its young cry out to God and wander about for lack of food? Going into chapter 39, verse 2, do you watch when the doe bears her fawn? Do you count the months till they bear? Do you know the time they give birth? Skipping to verse 19, do you give the horses its strength or clothe its neck with a flowing mane? Now we're starting to see something about God, that there's a tenderness to God in the way He views His creation. In the animal kingdom, look at verse 26. Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings toward the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high? It dwells on a cliff and stays there at night. A rocky crag from it is its stronghold. From there it looks for food. Its eyes detect it from afar. So Job is realizing that God, not only is He in control, He's also a caring creator. So Job listens as God speaks of the hunger of a raven and the strength of a horse and the sharp eye of an eagle. And there's something about that that is comforting. Earlier in the book, Job is responding to one of his friends in Job chapter 12. beginning with verse 7, he says, he's talking to the animals here. He says, but ask the animals what they think. Let them teach you. Let the birds tell you what's going on. Put your ear to the earth. Listen to or learn the basics. Listen, the fish in the ocean will tell you their stories. Isn't it clear that they know and agree that God is sovereign, that he holds all things in his hand, that the animals have a story to tell if you'll just listen to them? He actually talks about talking to the animals in a sense. So here in Job chapter 39, God is pointing out all the details of the animal kingdom, and that informs us that God is actually a caring creator. You go to the other side of the bed and you learn that God is thoughtful, that God is tender, and that God cares. Now, having said all that, I know that some of you still want to put God on the stand and ask him some questions, and you want him to give you an explanation. But the reality is, God doesn't owe Job or me or you any kind of explanation. He is God. Instead, he asks a series of questions for Job to come to this understanding. Job, I see and I care. And so here's a question for all of us. Do you believe that God cares? Have you ever taken your children to get shots? I know you have, if you have kids. You know, when they're little and they can't understand what's going on, all they know is that you're taking them to a place where they're getting poked with needles. And you can tell them that you care, but it really doesn't make any sense to them. How do you convince your children that you care for them? Well, you could take them to the closet and show them all their clothes and ask them, why do you have these clothes hanging up here? Well, it's because I care for you. Or you can take them to the pantry and open up the door to the pantry and show them all the food in the pantry and ask them, why is there food in there? It's because I care for you. This is kind of what God is doing for Job. At first, Job didn't even know this. In chapter 1, verse 3, we learned that he owned 7,000 sheep, 300 camels, 500 team of oxen, and 500, I believe it's female donkeys. And all that's taken away. And there's no plan B to recoup any of this. But he says at the end of this book, my ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. When he had everything, I mean everything, he says, I heard about God, but now that he's lost everything, he says, now my eyes have seen God. When he sees his need for God, he sees God. In fact, the only way that he sees God is after everything is stripped away. So have you ever just sat down maybe to figure out how you're going to make it? And when you do all the figuring, you find out you're short, that you don't see how you're going to make it. There's no cure for it. There's not enough. And this is a place where you meet God. When you are weak and desperate and you can't take another step. A lot of us grew up in the church hearing a lot about him. But it's in these desperate times that you can actually see God. I think for most of us, sadly, that we're content we're just content knowing about God. That we don't want to get to the point where we ever have to depend on him. So we arrange our lives in such a way where God is unnecessary. It's such the American thing to do. I mean, when the problem with that approach is that we go down the road such a long time, a long distance before we ever realize how necessary God really is. We live our lives without really depending on him because we don't recognize our need for him. And so God says to us to pray this way, give us this day our daily bread. But when's the last time you actually prayed for daily bread? We don't pray that prayer. And you know why? Because we can get bread anywhere, everywhere. God says, come to me, all you that are weary, and I will give you rest. And you might respond, well, does rest mean like a day at the spa or maybe a round of golf? That's really kind of what I'm needing these days. God says, cast all of your burdens on me. Well, that's a nice invitation, but a little workout at the end of the day and a little wine does it for me. And here's what we've done. We've surrounded our lives with all these comforts and supports that until God moves from being kind of a nice option to being 100% necessary, we fail to recognize our need for God. I've been in one of the nicest cities in America. Right before we cross over into Mexico, we land in San Diego, California. And San Diego is such a nice city, but do you know where you're more likely to meet God? It's not in San Diego. You want to see God, go to a place where people are in desperate need for Him. And so David said in the Psalm, He's close to the brokenhearted. 1 Peter chapter 5 and verse 7 says, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. And the question for all of us today is, do we believe that? If you don't, maybe the prescription for you this week is just to camp out in Job chapter 39 and let the animals tell you their story. It's interesting that Jesus uses the same approach when He wants to speak comfort to His followers. He says in Matthew chapter 10, verse 29, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground outside your Father's care. And even the very hairs of your head are numbered. So don't be afraid. You are worth more than many sparrows. And so God is tuned in to the earth. He's tuned into the animal kingdom, and He sees everything that happens there. And you are the prize of God's creation. So Jesus says, don't fear. Don't fear that God doesn't know you. Don't fear that God doesn't know what's going on in your life. And don't fear that God is not tender, because He is. He's tender and He's kind. And as we sing, He's a good, good Father. I hope that'll bless you. I hope you'll take that and receive that as you enter into this new week. May God bless you all.